Thank you. It is so great to be back here at Community Unitarian Universalist. I was telling Sandy when we met, when she delivered some toiletries to us, how much I appreciate this church. And I don't often use sports analogies. I don't know much about sports, actually, or care much about them. But, you guys punch beyond your weight as a church. And I speak at a lot of churches, and often we accomplish very little from the energy that I expend in that. I do it to inform people, but here you all actually listen and follow through and give back. And I just want to say respect to you for that and how much I appreciate that, and also how much I love working with Sandy. She does such a great job, and you're so creative in putting together a morning. So yes, let's give you a hand. I also have a couple, three people that are here today that I'd like to introduce. My wife Jill is with us today. Someone said my better half, but it's more like 3/4, actually. And then our new development director, Tom Martin, and his wife, Karen. They just moved here from Kerrville, and I'm really very, very thankful they've joined HRI. So I've spoken quite a few 4th of Julys, and I was thinking about that. I think they keep inviting me back, but I always say something negative and critical about our country on the 4th of July. So perhaps it seems like you're comfortable with that. But I thought I'd sort of I feel a little bit like Debbie Downer. So I thought I'd start out with some good news. How about that? Yes. So this is going to start out like a lot of immigration stories, sad, but it ends really triumphantly. We have been representing for the last several years a Palestinian family. These were young people, and the husband and wife and their children, and they lived in the part of Israel that's Palestinian but occupied by the Israeli army. They were critical of that, but also critical of Hamas, who is the extremist organization that is fighting and considered to be a terrorist organization by our government. And they were critical of that. They didn't condone violence. And because of that, they started getting harassed and threatened with death. Then, because there are no neutrals in this place, they started getting targeted by the Israeli government to seize their land. And ultimately, they did seize these families' land and force them to relocate. Then Hamas concluded that they had cooperated with the Israeli government. That they're like, well, we didn't cooperate. They took our land. But then that resulted in a number of threats and violence. They eventually burned their home. Their children suffered severe injuries as a result of that. Life became completely untenable for them, and they left and they came to the United States. And then we took their case just before everything shut down with COVID. We've spent this time preparing it. We had an awesome pro bono team from a law firm here, Vincent and Elkins. We went to court last week and won asylum for them in immigration court. There's almost nothing that is a better 4th of July story than that sort of victory. And I also like to point out something. The odds are stacked terribly against our clients. But when they walk into court with us, they're walking into court with some of the best lawyers in the United States, and tremendous resources and training and expertise go into winning a case like that. And that's what we bring to that. Thank you. So the title of the talk today is Si Puede. You may recognize that slogan from Barack Obama's campaign. But I thought I'd talk about a bit for where the slogan actually comes from. It was actually originated with Dolores Huerta, who was a comadre with Cesar Chavez. And according to Teresita Perez from the Center of American Progress, Si Puede is a term rooted in the struggle of working class Latinos. It was the rallying cry of the United Farm Workers Union in the 70s. Co-founders Dolores Huerta and Cesar Chavez adopted the motto, during a 25-day fast in Phoenix, Arizona, where they were trying to organize farm workers to demand fair wages and better working conditions. This mantra was meant to galvanize workers and inspire them. Yes, we can start a movement against odds. Yes, we can stand up against exploitation. Yes, we can fight for fair wages and medical and pension benefits. Over the years, Puede has also been adopted by other civil and labor rights groups involving Latinos around the country. And so I thought that was really an apt title for what I'm going to talk about, because I'm going to start talking about the state of immigration in the, now. And it's last year I spoke to you by the medium of Zoom, and I called the talk "The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly: The Biden Response to Immigration." And things have really not changed a lot. So it's a very, very challenging environment that we operate in. But it's super important for us to remember, yes, we can change. So it can seem hopeless when we look at the onslaught of attacks on our clients' rights, and not just our clients' rights, lots of other rights in this country. But we can change things if we organize, if we're consistent, and if we don't give up. And so that is really wrapped up in those wonderful words of Dolores Huerta. I want to, before I get into the substance of the law, I just want to take a second to talk about our organization and what we've done during the last 2+ years of COVID. Well, nobody at HRI was working on a sourdough recipe, okay? We have been working this entire time, many of us working in person. We shifted to work remote if you can, which is really where we still are. We still have people working remotely, but the deportation machine never slowed down. So we were I guess it slowed down a bit because the courts were closed, but they were still generating notices that we had to respond to. We still had to meet with clients, and then most significantly, our clients had significant social service needs, which we rose. So during the last fiscal year, we helped 626 legal clients. We helped them win asylum. We helped them get work authorizations. We helped them get green cards. So one of the happy things we got to do was that we were constantly meeting with clients, giving them their green card or permanent residency. We also had 1,535 people who were recipients of our social services. These were 835 adults and 700 children. We had 279 client households who were directly impacted by COVID. Many of our clients, of course, were essential workers, and so they were contracting COVID, and not only that, suffering the economic downturns that, of course, many of you suffered as well. We also distributed $385,000 in rental assistance to clients and in-kind bundles, 122 food deliveries, 632 toiletries and hygiene products. Thank you very much, community Unitarian. Diapers, wipes, bus passes, grocery cards, all of that. So we've been very busy meeting our clients' needs, and it's been, of course, a privilege. So we think a lot about, when we think about immigration, and almost always somebody will say, so what do you think about what's going on at the border? I'm like, well, that's interesting. It's what the news cares about, but we have clients here in Dallas, and that's who we focus on. But I want to present a bit of a context about what goes on at the border, because it often gets presented, particularly by the white nationalists that disfavor immigration, that this is a crisis on our border, it's unprecedented, and we have the lion's share of this. Why is the United States always the one that's having to cope with this? Well, this is a complete misunderstanding because of the situation, because we're facing an almost unprecedented level of migration in the entire world. And what's happening at our border is actually only a very small part of that. And so we saw those pictures of Ukrainians fleeing and to Poland, greeted with strollers and bags of food and things by the Poles. And we see the pictures of us turning away people or border bridges, and even worse, Border Patrol riding against Haitian migrants as if they were cattle to be rounded up. But the context is this year, over 100 million people have been uprooted from their homes. So that's the context, what we're talking about at our border with Mexico. And of course, some of those people included the Ukrainians. I started to say ironic, but it's actually not ironic. It's just an illustration of how racism permeates all of this, of how welcoming we've been to Ukrainian refugees, which we should be. They're fleeing war. We should be freeing. But we are not as welcoming to the black migrants, the Haitian migrants, and more about that in a minute. But this is when people ask me occasionally, why do you get so worked up about this, Bill? It's because these policies are rooted in racism and white nationalism. You see that manifested by how we treat different groups of people, and that's always been true in our country. So I want to talk about, first we're going to talk about the things that happened during the Trump administration that were intended to dismantle immigration in this country. Then we're going to talk about the efforts of the Biden administration to undo those, which has been a real mixed bag, and then what the present status of those are. So I remember standing up at a fairly conservative church right after the election in 2016 and talking about, look, one of the things that's happening is an ad hoc turning away of people at the border. There was no policy. It was just what was happening. Asylum seekers were coming to the border, applying for asylum, and told, we don't take asylum seekers anymore. And somebody said to me, well, don't you have some happy stories to tell? And I said, well, I do actually have happy stories to tell about people who see their lives change, but I feel an obligation to tell you what is actually happening in your name and my name at the border. So that's how it started. And then it picked up steam. So, of course, we immediately had the Muslim ban. Every activist I know was out at DFW Airport responding to us trying to keep Muslims from coming here, some of whom were not migrants. They were just here to visit their families. Then you had the dramatic reduction in refugee numbers, and we're still trying to recover from that. That completely annihilated all the refugee resettlement agencies who their whole economic model is based upon how many people they resettle. And so when those numbers go down, their income goes down, and they're still trying to rebuild that. And we're still not really successfully resettling the number of refugees we even say we want to accept. Then there was metering. You'll notice these just dehumanizing terms that the government used. Metering was just allowing a few asylum seekers across the border at a time. And they kept lists literally on slips of notebook paper of these people whose very lives were at stake at the border. Then we had asylum ban number 1, that said you must apply at a port of entry. If you don't apply at a port of entry, you're not going to be entitled to claim asylum. Then we had the Orwellian named migrant protection protocols, which were anything but intended to protect migrants. And I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. Most of us that are advocates call that remain in Mexico. Then there was the asylum ban 2, where people were banned from asylum if they passed through another country on their way here, which I guess is another way of saying everyone but Canadians. Then we had safe third country agreements, which we entered into with Guatemala, as if Guatemala was a safe. We have people, of course, fleeing Guatemala, so Guatemala's not a safe place for African migrants. Then Title 42, I'll talk more about that in a minute, which was people called it the Stephen Miller Special, which was using the excuse of COVID to expel people without giving them a day in court. Then we had proposed changes to asylum law. We had proposed fee changes and really critically, attacks on case law. Jefferson Beauregard Sessions, our Attorney General at the time, took direct aim at laws that were created to protect immigrant survivors of domestic violence, and he sought to challenge, but to overrule those case law protections. So some of those things President Biden immediately addressed. We, of course, did away with the Muslim ban. We did away with the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, did away with these attacks on case law, which freed up at least the legal arguments for people to make to protect survivors of domestic violence. These asylum bans also left. So that leaves us with Remain in Mexico, Title 42, the asylum rules, DACA, and ICE enforcement priorities. And I'll talk about each of those separately. I'll talk first about Remain in Mexico. This, of course, was if somebody comes up to the border and applies for asylum, historically, and I like telling people I've been doing this work since the War of 1812, and it's always been hard, but during that whole period of time, people would come to the border, people from all over the world, and they would legally claim asylum at the border. They would be paroled into the United States. They find their way to Dallas. We provide legal assistance to them, and we'd win. Oh, these are amber alerts. Okay. No worries. I thought it was an alarm at our policies of government policies, but so think for a moment. So you're told wait in Mexico for your case as opposed to being paroled into the United States. Well, how is that supposed to work? Here's the answer: it's not supposed to work. It was intended to discourage people from applying for asylum. Because this family I talked about earlier, they met many, many times with their lawyers. We were accumulating documents. We were finding expert witnesses, country condition witnesses, forensic experts to testify about medical conditions, forensic psychologists, counseling. None of that is available in Matamoros. And so they set up these giant tent courts across the border in the United States, and they would let people in. They'd stand in line for hours to come across. Of course, they had no lawyers. There was eventually 70,000 people in Remain in Mexico. So President Biden got a lot of pressure from people, and rightly so, about Remain in Mexico, that it was an inhumane policy. Human Rights First recorded thousands of people experienced rape and murder and kidnapping because they were forced to live in these very dangerous border cities while they were waiting for their case. It was immoral and wrong. When President Biden announced that we were withdrawing we were going to do away with Remain in Mexico, and this was immediately challenged in court. Now, I'll take a second to talk about that. The states that are controlled by anti-immigrant folks, they took a page from the progressive actions during the Trump administration. So advocates picked courts in Northern District of California in the Ninth Circuit and filed lawsuits there challenging some of these policies by the Trump administration, and they were successful in stopping or at least slowing down some of those procedures. Well, they thought, well, that's a really good idea. That's what we'll do, and that's what they've been doing. So when the Biden administration announced that they were going to withdraw from MPP or Remain in Mexico, they filed a case in Judge Kazmarek's court, who was a Trump-appointed federal judge in Amarillo, and he enjoined them from doing away with Remain in Mexico. Now, that made its way up to the Fifth Circuit, which is the federal court and federal appeals court in New Orleans. And the Fifth Circuit's very, very conservative court. People discourage folks from even filing lawsuits in Texas for fear that it's going to wind up in the Fifth Circuit and get a bad result, which is exactly what happened. The Fifth Circuit affirmed this district court. It went up to the United States Supreme Court, and Friday, the United States Supreme Court, with a majority opinion written by Justice Roberts, overruled the Fifth Circuit. And so that meant that the administration is free to withdraw or not withdraw, but to do away, remain in Mexico. So that was a bit of good news, which we all celebrated. I pause for a moment. Yes. Next, and more alarming in a lot of ways, is Title 42. Title 42, as I said, is the Stephen Miller special. It's the CDC said at the time there's no justification for public health law to expel asylum seekers. I mean, we're allowing people into the country the whole time, so it's just asylum seekers that we say are banned and barred and subject to being expelled. So one of the problems with that is that it denies asylum seekers a day in court. And that's important for a couple reasons. One's a practical reason. Because people weren't going to court, they weren't getting ordered deported. And so some of the people applied for asylum, they didn't have a valid case. And if they'd gone to court, they would have been ordered deported. And then there's serious consequences if they return. If you don't go to court and you're just expelled, then there's no consequences to you making multiple attempts to cross the border. And that's one of the things that's happened. You see these numbers that are like, we have unprecedented level of people trying to cross the border. Some of that is because of Title 42, because people aren't being deported and they're making multiple efforts to enter the country. So it has unintended consequence. But worse, according to Human Rights First, there are 10,000 reports of rape, murder, and kidnapping of people that have been forced to wait in Mexico or are excluded from the United States in making their case. But worst of all, really, is that these policies have had a disproportionate impact on Black migrants. We continue to deport Haitians and Cameroonians under Title 42. And there have been 4,000 Haitians that were expelled, put on planes back to Haiti. Well, Haiti, of course, doesn't have a functioning government because their president was assassinated in the presidential palace. They've suffered earthquakes. There's a reason why thousands of Haitians have been fleeing that country, and we're putting them on planes and sending them back there. And this has been tragically manifested in the last few days. It forces people to ever more dangerous routes to come into the United States. And this is why, we know, why would people pack themselves in a tractor trailer? Right? Why would people do that? They're not stupid people. They understand the risk inherent of that, and they feel that there is no choice. They're leaving countries because of instability, violence, climate change, drought. And if you are a good mother or father, then what do? You try to find, this is the history of our country, you try to come to America to build a better life for your family. And so we're by being cruel, we're never going to stop migration. It's not, if that's your strategy, it fails. It fails every time because desperate people are going to come anyway. All you've done is it just results in loss of life and danger. And of course, it's humane. The state court in Lafayette, or a federal court in Lafayette, Louisiana, finally, there was a lot of pressure on President Biden to do away with Title 42. And there's big campaigns, particularly led by black led organizations like the Black Alliance for Just Immigration and the Haitian Bridge Alliance. And finally, after a lot of pressure, President Biden said, yeah, we're going to withdraw from Title 42. Immediately sued in Lafayette, Louisiana. There was a decision by another Trump-appointed judge to enjoin the ability of Biden to withdraw from that. That was appealed to the Fifth Circuit, and that's now pending in the Fifth Circuit. And we don't expect a good outcome because it's the Fifth Circuit, and then that'll go up to the United States Supreme Court. Maybe we got a bit of a hint from this last opinion from the Roberts Court. Maybe the Supreme Court will take that case and permit the Biden administration to withdraw from Title 42. I hope so. ICE enforcement priorities. This is one of the this is really kind of down in the weeds, but it's really important. So one of the things that changed from President Obama who didn't have a great track record on immigration, but one of the things that changed is that under Obama, it was like, we're gonna target you for deportation if you're a violent criminal, and we're not gonna target other people. Trump said, no priorities, everybody we find is getting deported. And so that's why there were so many just normal people that had never had brushes with law enforcement that were getting deported. Now, President Biden said, we want to go back to the way we did things. The Obama administration prioritized, violent criminals, people like that, for deportation. That was challenged in Judge Tipton's court in the Southern District of Texas, and that case is pending. So we don't know if we're going to be able to do that or not. Then, again, a bit of good news. DACA has continued. This is, for those of you that may not recall, but DACA is a benefit for children that came here as minors and work here, and they're undocumented. Often you hear the stories of people that they found out they were undocumented when they tried to enroll for college or they tried to get a driver's license, something like that. Their parents said, yeah, you can't do that because you're undocumented. Well, of course, we were hoping that the DREAM Act would pass in Congress, and it didn't during the Obama administration. President Obama finally said, well, I'm going to, by executive order, say that these are individuals that can now they don't get status. It's no road to status for them, but they're not going to be deported. They can get driver's license, they get a Social Security card, and they can get work authorization. Well, we all know DACA recipients because there are school teachers and they are essential workers. We have hundreds of, 800,000 DACA recipients, and one really great example of that is one of our staff members. This young woman came to the United States when she was 2 years old. She was able to get DACA. She's now gone on to go to college and get a master's in social work, and she's now a caseworker for our organization. So when you talk about DACA, that's who you're talking about. Now that is set for oral argument next week in the Fifth Circuit. So let's think good thoughts. Maybe they'll grow a heart just like the Grinch. And this is, and so this young woman that works with us, she and I got interviewed by a reporter about that. And this is a real common question. They said, why shouldn't Congress just carve out DACA because she was saying we need comprehensive immigration reform so she can not just have DACA, but have actual status to live in the United States. And so the reporter said, why don't we accomplish that, carve that out from the rest of immigration reform? And she said, and rightly so, no, we need comprehensive immigration reform. And the reason is that pits her against her parents. You're saying to her, my parents don't have status, but wouldn't you like Congress to do something for you and not benefit your parents or your older brother who didn't qualify for DACA? And she, because she's a really smart and compassionate young woman, said, no, I think we should reform the whole thing. So I guess in summary of the state of things, you had a lot of evil done during the Trump administration. Biden has been timid in his response, slow in his response, but been making efforts to undo some of that harm. And the extremists, extreme xenophobes on the other side of this issue have taken a page from our book and are fighting this in federal court. And because of the number of federal judge appointees during the Trump administration, that strategy's been somewhat successful. So again, that's a Bill Debbie Downer message. I want to end on a high note, however. This was unexpected. It just happened to me Friday, and it was just one of those moments, if you get to do this work, that's really great. So I'm sitting at my desk Friday afternoon. I see on my caller ID the name of a woman I represented in 2004. She was a Zimbabwean business owner. She had been very successful and then got involved in pro-democracy movement. As a result of that, she lost everything. I remember preparing her case for trial, and I said, what happened? Because she had a home, cars, her kids went to private school. She had a really good life in Zimbabwe. I said, what happened to all your things? She goes, I came here with a suitcase. So I had nothing. So I met her at a Movement for Democratic Change, a Zimbabwean opposition group, had a rally in downtown Dallas. Back when I was in private practice, I went to that rally. She came up to me. She said, I need a lawyer. And I said, well, which has happened to me some frequency back then. And I'd say, well, call HRI. If they take your case, I'll take it, and I'll represent you. And I did, and we won asylum for her. So she called. She goes, Mr. Holston, I just went for my citizenship interview yesterday, and the officer pulled out the file that you had worked on for me, and I didn't realize how much work that was, because the file was huge. And I said, yeah, it was a lot of work. And she says, I passed my citizenship interview. I remembered that President Roosevelt was the president during the Great Depression. I said, a lot of Americans couldn't pass that test. And she said, and this was unusual, they swore me in right then. So she's already a citizen of the United States. And it just made my day, because she was calling and you could just hear the emotion in her voice and the appreciation. And that's, I'll end on this. I'm given a lot. I'm 66. I'm giving a lot of thought to my legacy as a lawyer. And it's interesting when I look back on I was licensed 40 years ago this year. And I tried lots of jury trials. I handled deals worth millions of dollars. And I barely remember any of that. People like Anna, that's who I remember. And that's what we get to do every day. And that's what you help us do. I'll mention this one last thing, because Tom will punch me if I don't. This is 4th of July is our annual giving campaign. So if you want to participate in that, I encourage you to go to our website and do that. Thank you so much again for the opportunity to talk to you. It's a real pleasure.
I'm glad you mentioned that campaign, because I was going to do that for you. I get I'm one of the supporters of HRI, so I get all their lovely emails and their updates, and I encourage all of you to do that too, because you get a lot of information about what this wonderful organization does. Thank you so much.